Try to think back, if you can, to the transition period of the Biden-Harris administration. I'm talking about the personnel decisions and especially the key cabinet appointments that the incoming administration made in the weeks after the media called the race for Joe Biden back at the end of 2020. Now, those personnel decisions were treated as basically non-stories. They came and went, and the media didn't talk much about them. Wasn't a lot of outrage or debate. Pete Buttigieg, for example, became the transportation secretary because he likes trains and was vaguely interested in airplanes. And he's gay, and those were his qualifications. That was it. So they put him in charge of the Department of Transportation, which has a budget of tens of billions of dollars and oversees the nation's railways and airports. Why not? Made sense to Democrats at the time. What's the worst that could happen? A train carrying toxic chemicals might derail somewhere in Ohio, let's say? What are the odds of that? Well, then there was the nomination of Lloyd Austin to lead the Defense Department, and that was really inspiring. You see, Lloyd Austin was serving on the board of Raytheon, one of the biggest defense contractors in the world. Raytheon was paying him a lot of money. And then, without much fanfare, the Biden-Harris administration appointed Lloyd Austin to run the Pentagon. What could go wrong? Surely Lloyd Austin wouldn't try to enrich his former colleagues in the defense industry by, say, sending billions of dollars worth of weaponry to a tiny, corrupt country in Eastern Europe. That would be unthinkable. And then there was the appointment of someone using the name Rachel Levine, a biological male originally named Richard, who decided in middle age to start wearing a dress and rebrand himself as Rachel. Made perfect sense, we were told, for a man deeply confused about the basic realities of human biology to oversee the nation's healthcare system. Now, sure, he might pressure hospitals to castrate and sterilize as many children as possible. He might pose for some uncomfortable photographs with Sam Brinton, the cross-dressing nuclear waste expert and kleptomaniac who'd been terrorizing airport baggage claims all across the eastern seaboard for years, before also being appointed for a role in the Biden-Harris administration. But that's the cost of human progress, we were told at the time. I'm going through these appointments to make a couple of points. The first point is that all of these appointments, and many others like them, including the appointment of an open borders advocate to run the Department of Homeland Security, were grotesque. None of them should have been allowed to go through, but they did. And the country paid the predictable consequences. Biden, he appointed more cross-dressers than we'd been used to seeing in government at that point, but otherwise his picks were exactly what we come to expect. A bunch of corrupt and useless bureaucrats who went on to do what corrupt and useless bureaucrats always do, which, by the way, is expand their own power and enrich themselves and their friends. That's the whole deal. Well, thankfully, it's clear that Donald Trump is not going to follow that typical strategy. Donald Trump's incoming administration is already unlike any other in American history. I mean, this is a transition team that's making a concerted effort to select competent, independent cabinet officials, people who aren't self-interested cronies or morons who are selected on the basis of identity politics. He's like picking people who are actually competent and who might actually advance the agenda that the American people voted for, which is Donald Trump's agenda. Imagine that. So let's start with one of the selections that was announced last night and that has upset a lot of people on the left. Donald Trump revealed that Pete Hegseth, a Bronze Star recipient who served nearly 2 decades in the military, including in Iraq and Afghanistan, will be nominated as the Secretary of Defense. Now, Hegseth is most recognizable at the moment as a Fox News host, where he often advocates on behalf of veterans. He's also used his platform to outline changes that, in his view, need to be made to the military immediately. And this gives us kind of a preview of hopefully what we can expect now that he's running the Defense Department. Let's watch.
The Pentagon is in the book, the exact amount of years, but in the past X number of years, 10, 12, 15, the Pentagon has a perfect record in all of its war games against China. We lose every time inside the Pentagon war games. We know what our real capability. You see, we didn't even get to this part of the war on warriors. I mean, the military-industrial complex, the way we procure weapon systems, we're always, the way our system works, the way our bureaucratic system works, where the speed of weapons procurement works, we're always a decade behind in fighting the last war. Whereas China, we have, what did Rumsfeld say? You go to the war, the army you have. We have the army. China's building an army specifically dedicated to defeating the United States of America. That is their strategic outset. Take hypersonic missiles. So if our whole power projection platform is aircraft carriers and the ability to project power that way strategically around the globe, and yeah, we have a nuclear triad and all of that, but a big part of it. And if 15 hypersonic missiles can take out our 10 aircraft carriers in the first 20 minutes of a conflict, what does that look like? Well, first of all, you got to fire. You got to fire the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, and you got to fire this. I mean, obviously, you're going to bring in a new Secretary of Defense, but any general that was involved, general, admiral, whatever that was involved in any of the DEI woke, it's got to go. Either you're in for war fighting, and that's it, and that's the only litmus test we care about. You got to get DEI and CRT out of military academies, so you're not training young officers to be baptized in this type of thinking. And then, whatever the standards, whatever the combat standards were, say, in, 1995, let's just make those the standards. And as far as recruiting, to hire the guy that, did Top Gun Maverick and create some real ads that motivate people to want to serve. I'm straight up just saying we should not have women in combat roles. It hasn't made us more effective, hasn't made us more lethal, has made fighting more complicated. We've all served with women, and they're great. It just, our institutions don't have to incentivize that in places where not traditionally, over human history, men in those positions are more capable.
Well, I'm sold. I'm sold on that pick. I don't need to know anything else about the guy, just based on that alone. This is all common sense stuff, but it's the kind of stuff that you would just never hear from anyone in a cabinet position, any kind of bureaucrat, until now. And these are the kind of picks, by the way, that probably only Donald Trump would make. Like, Donald Trump's probably the only guy who would select him as Secretary of Defense. But again, all common sense, the overwhelming majority of countries don't allow women in combat for obvious reasons. We are one of only a handful of countries that do that. And no, the military shouldn't be teaching its soldiers about white rage, nor should the Pentagon be focused on recruiting girl bosses or diverse applicants. That strategy isn't working. The military is now regularly missing its recruitment goals, primarily because they've gone out of their way to alienate white men for political reasons. And as a result, our military is much smaller than China's. Morale is terrible. We're constantly losing war games, as Pete Hegseth pointed out. And making matters worse, our military leaders are clearly inept, as evidenced by the disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan, and also as evidenced by everything else that's happened over the last 20 or 30 years. So with this track record, the absolute last person you'd want to pick for the job of defense secretary is another Lloyd Austin type. The Lloyd Austins of the world are the ones who created the very situation that Hegseth is talking about in those clips. That's why you need someone who's motivated and equipped to make some radical changes, which actually aren't that radical because you're just going back to what was common sense and what was standard, only a few decades ago. But by our standards, it's radical. And you want someone who knows what it's like to be a soldier in a war zone and who hasn't been corrupted by his connections to the military-industrial complex. In short, you want somebody like Pete Hegseth. Now, as you'd expect, Democrats don't see it that way. They lost their minds when Trump briefly paused the flow of military weapons to Ukraine, and now they're losing their minds because Pete Hegseth might spurn the defense industry too. Elizabeth Warren, the senator from Massachusetts, was especially enraged. She was sneering last night, along with a lot of her colleagues. She wrote, quote, "A Fox and Friends weekend co-host is not qualified to be the Secretary of Defense. I lead the Senate Military Personnel Panel. All three of my brothers served in uniform. I respect every one of our service members. Donald Trump's pick will make us less safe and must be rejected." So right away, the woman who pretended to be an Indian tries to dismiss Hegseth as a weekend co-host, completely ignoring his military service and his ideas and his advocacy for veterans. And by the way, it's funny that the fact that he is a combat veteran is not relevant, but she's a greater authority because her brothers are veterans. So his own experience doesn't matter. He's just a weekend co-host. But no, she is an authority because my brothers served. So how does that apply to you? How does that make you qualified to say anything? Oh, she's also on the military personnel panel. She's on a panel, everybody. I mean, this guy actually served in war zones, but she's on a panel. She sat on so many panels and talked about things. So we're supposed to believe, based on her word, that if Hegseth had served on the board of Raytheon, he would somehow be vastly more equipped for the job. We apparently want defense secretaries who are bureaucrats or defense contractors first and foremost, because that's obviously worked out really well over the past 3 decades. And in the context of a second Trump administration, the criticism of Pete Hegseth makes even less sense, Because recall that under the first Trump administration, the Pentagon actively sabotaged Trump's policy objectives. Our envoy to Syria has admitted this. It's one of the most incredible admissions ever printed, but it never got much attention. The envoy stated that officials in the first Trump administration were, quote, always playing shell games in order to hide the actual number of U.S. troops in Syria from Trump. That's an actual quote, shell games. In other words, they were lying to the commander-in-chief. Trump wanted troops to leave Syria, and they told him the troops were already gone. And it wasn't true. They were lying to undermine his agenda. People should have been put on trial for that. I mean, that's criminal, but it just faded from memory. It's faded from maybe the media's memory and the public's memory, but it hasn't faded from Trump's memory. So given that background, you can understand why this time around Trump wants someone he can actually depend on, someone who agrees with his agenda and will try to enact it. All right, let's talk about something that affects all of us, taxes. The October 15th deadline is passed, and if you're not prepared, you could be in for a world of hurt. Do you owe back taxes? Are your returns still unfiled? Did you miss the deadline to file for an extension? Well, now that we're past October 15th, the IRS is probably gearing up for some aggressive enforcement. Trust me, you don't want to be on their radar. We're talking wage garnishments, frozen bank accounts, even property seizures. It's not pretty, folks, but before you start panicking, there's still hope. Tax Network USA has helped taxpayers save over $1 billion in tax debt and filed over 10,000 tax returns. These guys specialize in reducing tax burdens for hardworking Americans like you. Look, I get it. Dealing with the IRS is about as fun as a root canal, but ignoring the problem won't make it go away. So here's what you need to do. For a complimentary consultation, call today at 1-800-958-1000 or visit their website at tnusa.com/Walsh. Their experts will walk you through a few simple questions to see how much you can save. That's 1-800-958-1000 or visit tnusa.com/Walsh today. Don't let the IRS take advantage of you. Get the help you need with Tax Network USA. Wants people you can trust. That's the single most important quality that a cabinet pick can have. You got to be able to trust them. And that's very obvious to Trump now after what he experienced in his first term. But Democrats are still going to resist this nomination anyway for reasons that they can't really articulate. They just know that it would be a disaster for them if an outsider took control of the Defense Department. That's why one of CNN's hosts tried to push back on Scott Jennings' argument for Hegseth last night on CNN. Let's watch that.
Anyone have confidence in the current leadership of the Pentagon and the way the defense situation has been operating for the last several years? I mean, from the Afghanistan pullout, which was an extreme debacle for which no one was held accountable. We've had spy balloons flying over the United States. We built a $300 million pier as a public relations stunt, which wound up killing an American service member. I'd say I've had just about enough of the so-called insiders running the Defense Department. I think we ought to give Pete Hegseth a chance because he's got two insiders. All the criticism of him is that he's not the expected Washington pick, and I'm just saying to you that the American people just voted against the expected Washington pick. So he's got 20 years in service, Afghanistan, Iraq, 2 Bronze Stars, Princeton, Harvard. Yeah, he's on TV, but so are the rest of us.
By the way, that list
I think he ought to be given a chance.
That list you just gave is really interesting because you highlighted a bunch of things that the civilian leadership of the country decided on. In the military, their job was just to execute. They execute.
How did it go?
I'm just saying. How
did it go?
In terms of the decision making, you're assigning decision making responsibility to the military over things that civilians are responsible for.
So you make a good point. The civilian leadership made decisions, and then the people they put in charge of the Pentagon carried it out. And it was all pretty much a disaster.
So for starters, it's pretty amusing for starters, as Jennings points out, for television pundits to attack Hegseth for being a TV host when they're all television personalities also. So either being on television makes you an idiot or it doesn't. And if it does, then all these people should quit their jobs now before CNN closes down and fires them anyway, which appears more likely to happen with each passing day. Then the anchor says that civilians give the orders in the military, which is obviously true, but it's the Pentagon, which is also run by civilians, that has the job of carrying out those orders. And as Jennings pointed out, the Pentagon has repeatedly failed to do its job. They were wrong about the spy balloon and what it was doing. They were wrong about the logistics of the Afghanistan pullout, which resulted in the deaths of American service members. Couldn't even build a pier properly. And so what exactly is the argument for keeping those kinds of people in control of the Defense Department? How could we possibly do any worse than they've been doing? That's a point that Tom Homan, the incoming border czar, just made on Fox News. He was asked whether he was worried about having the title of border czar, given that Kamala Harris has done everything she can to run away from that title. And here's how he responded.
You know, the last person who was border czar, she didn't want to be called border czar. You're proud of it, right?
Yeah.
You know what? I'm going to look like a genius, because when you follow failure, you can't help but succeed, right?
Yeah.
And look, to the American people, President Trump is going to secure this border. He's going to save American lives. He's going to, by securing the border, we're going to drop illegal alien crime, which is skyrocketing. Yep. Less people are going to die from fentanyl. Less children are going to be sex trafficked. Less women will be sexually assaulted on the southern border. The criminal cartels will be put out of business by this president.
Go get him, Tom Homan. Appreciate it.
I think that's the right attitude. I'm going to look like a genius because when you follow up failure, you can't help but succeed. And that is true. And also, it's all the more reason to go in there and make radical changes. Can't get any worse. And so go in there and make the changes, and whatever risks are involved in that, politically, take those risks. And that pretty much sums up the entire transition so far. We're so used to administration officials who lie to us, who try to use emotional blackmail and manipulation, that's pretty much impossible to be disappointed by the incoming Trump administration at this point. I mean, just by demonstrating that they don't care about the media's manipulation and false narratives, they're already well ahead of their predecessors. It's also clear that the federal bureaucracy, which functioned to undermine Trump at every possible opportunity the first time around, isn't going to exist in the same form the second time. So last night, Trump officially announced that Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy will be running the Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE. Trump said the goal of this new department, which actually is not going to be in the government, but it's going to be an independent, outside the government organization. But the goal will be to dismantle government bureaucracy, slash excess regulations, cut wasteful expenditures, and restructure federal agencies. He said they'll be done within 2 years, what he called the perfect gift to America on the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. And this is good because the task of, as he says, dismantling government bureaucracy should be the number one focus of Trump's second term. I mean, because nothing else can be done unless that is done first. And Elon Musk is just the guy to do it. He showed up to Twitter and immediately axed 80% of the staff. And of course, as we remember, everybody in the media said it would destroy the company. They said the whole site would crash and burn and be forgotten. And yet here we are, 2 years later, place is running better than ever. Now, the problem in the federal government is like what the problem was in Twitter, except multiplied by, about a factor of, let's say, 1 million. Unlike every other company on the planet, the federal government doesn't undergo mass layoffs. It just grows and grows year after year, siphons more and more money from taxpayers without any accountability. These bureaucrats call themselves public servants, but really the public is serving them. We're the ones who go to work every day to pay their salaries. And what exactly do they do for us? Do we really need these people to spend tens of thousands of dollars on gender equity in places like Honduras? Do we need them to develop new bat coronaviruses in secret labs in Wuhan? Do we need them to use our money to subsidize some of the most useless college degrees in existence? Do we need them to conduct fraudulent criminal trials of the leading presidential candidate? Do we need them to issue insane new regulations, in the name of saving the environment, like banning the sale of gas-powered vehicles or gas stoves or plastic straws or whatever else? Of course we don't. We've never needed any of that. What we have needed for a long time now is for the government to get out of the way of human progress. They need to stop spending and printing money as if it's endless. They need to do what every American in the private sector has to do, which is justify their salaries. They need to explain how exactly they're serving the public instead of the other way around. And this is a reckoning that would have been unthinkable if Kamala had won this election. We'd be dealing with another parade of useless BIPOC, trans, whatever appointees who exist only to check boxes. And now things are different. And giving Musk and Ramaswamy the hacksaw with a directive to go to town on the federal bureaucracy means that maybe, for the first time ever, some real and substantial cuts will actually be made. No Republican president in modern times has ever actually done anything to cut the size of government. They've all talked about it. None of them have done it. Much less have they taken any steps to gut the federal bureaucracy and get rid of all the useless people and their useless departments and programs. In fact, Republicans, of course, have only contributed to that problem. They've added to it. There's pretty good reason to think that this time will be different. Trump has picked the right two guys for the job, which is why the federal bureaucrats are panicking, and their panic will only become more unhinged in the days ahead. For everyone else, for people who actually earn their living, it's a time to celebrate something that's never happened before in modern American history. The behemoth federal bureaucracy is hopefully about to get what it deserves, what's been coming to it for decades. If Trump fulfills his promises, and that means simply letting the people he's hiring do the jobs they've been hired to do, if that happens, it will mean ultimately that America becomes a freer, safer, more prosperous place. And if this is the fascism they warned us about, then, well, it can't come soon enough. Thanks for checking out this video. If you'd like to listen to my full podcast on the go, you can check out The Matt Walsh Show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.